Now, if I was to say call 192 or dial 100 on your home telephone in the UK, would you have a clue what I was talking about? Would you have a telephone index gadget that sprang up with all your numbers on when making a telephone call? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going back over the years to look how important the home telephone was in British life and how it changed our society to anyone that could afford to have one in this era. So let's get on with it. Let's talk about the home telephone of the past and how it compares to the present. Has telephoning got any better? I'd say probably not, but I'll let you decide. During the 1960s and 70s, the GPO, the General Post Office, was very much in charge of our telecommunications and our home phones. Most of us had those rotary dial phones such as the GPO 746 or the 706, or the posh ones, the GPO 722, which was a trim phone, which is always seen in posh houses. Now, I don't know whether you remember watching Butterflies with Wendy Craig, and you'll notice in their kitchen they've got one, hadn't they? But many of us had to go to the good old phone box, and I can remember people impatiently queuing to use those phone boxes, putting faces at the person stuck on the phone while you waited outside in the cold. I wonder if you can remember all those phone boxes in your area that have slowly and gradually disappeared. Use of the telephone was normally a privilege in someone's house, and of course it cost quite a lot of money to have and to use, in fact much more than today. And people paid a standing charge, and they also pay for each individual call, depending on what time of the day or the weekend that you made these calls. They were more expensive, what they called peak times, than they were off-peak. Off-peak was during the evenings and weekends when calls were cheaper. Calls were charged by units, which clocked up as soon as somebody answered the telephone at the other end. Units were always published on your telephone bill, and telephone bills were sent out every 3 months or a quarter. In order to help you budget your telephone bill, you could buy telephone stamps, which you could get from the post office to stick on a card, and you just simply handed the card over to the amount of stamps that would reduce your bill or even pay for the whole lot. And let's never forget that coin box next to the phone when neighbours were obliged to put 10 pence in when they used it. Bit of a money box. It used to be rattled by whoever owned the phone.
Who do you think you are talking to me like that? Who do you think you are?
Bloody party lines. Get off the phone. You've been on for 3 hours. Party lines may have been cheap, but you can never get on the phone.
Many people had private lines, but there were also things that they called party lines, which meant that you shared your line with another subscriber. This meant that if you picked up your telephone when the other subscriber was on the phone, you would listen and hear their telephone call, every single word. So a lot of people used to listen into their calls just to hear the gossip, even though they probably would never know the person. The party line idea was to make your bills cheaper as you shared the cost of the line rental, but not the cost of the calls that you made. The party line idea was to make your bills cheaper as you shared the cost of the line rental, but not the cost of the calls that you made. Because of the expense of telephone bills, many people used to put locks on their rotary dial phones. This was placed on the number 1 in order to stop people from dialing. But many people realised because it was what they called pull style, a good tap on the top of the phone where the receiver goes down a number of times would make communication, and you could call someone. Simply tap it once for 1, twice for 2, and so on, and 10 times would be the number 0. With patience, yes, you could make calls even without removing the lock. There was no such thing as itemised billing, so you got charged for the amount of units that you used. One of the first numbers that got automatic voice was the speaking clock, introduced in 1936, and the voice of Jane Kane, a London operator who won a competition and became the first person to record the times, which could be accessed by dialing 123. The voices have changed over the years, and now you can still dial 123 for the time, which is now voiced by a Scottish fella called Alan Steadman. Be careful when you ring today though. The speaking clock is now a premium rate call. Now there are certain telephone numbers that you remember, or maybe you've forgotten them. Well, you dial 100 and dial the operator for free of charge. And you could ask them more or less anything. In fact, I can even remember asking the operator whether I could use plain flour or self-raising flour in order to bake some Yorkshire puddings. And she was good enough to give me the answer. That's how good they were. And there was no waiting in a queue. You got through right away. The operator was there primarily to connect to numbers, but they also offered a ACC service, Assisted Caller Cost, where they would call you back and tell you the cost of this call. You could also call the operator to request an alarm call at a small cost. Plus they would handle a transfer charge call, or if in the USA a collect call, and they would just reverse the charges. The subscriber would ask if they would accept the charge before connecting you. But you could hear the other person on the other end of the line, so if you were quick enough, you could get your message through, even though they said no, we will not accept the charges.
You'll have to excuse me, I just need to make a quick call. Hello operator, can I have a reverse charge call please? Yeah, it's Mr. Tom Senior. Let's see what happens. What do you mean you won't accept the charges? Huh. So much for friend, eh? Tom Senior is a fantastic fella. Just a little joke there.
Another number we remember is 192, which was a free directory inquiry service. But I can remember the operator on the 192 would actually be looking through a telephone directory to give you the number that you were looking for. And I can remember what they said. It was, directory inquiries, which town please? Telephone number 155 was what you called if you wanted an international number. And you could book an international call through the operator. Again, it was free of charge. But I can remember feeling very important when I was working in the office when I was about 16. I dialed 155 and I said, can you put me through to Germany? Now before 0800 numbers began, you could dial 100 for the operator to ask you a 4-digit code, and the number was normally given on an advertisement, let's say on a newspaper or TV. The operator would simply put you through free of charge. It was a free phone. So, for example, free phone 2151, the operator will put you through to Case Catalogue. If you need a repair or something went wrong with your telephone, you simply dialed 151 and again it was free of charge. They took the details and got your problem sorted out. It was as simple as that. Now the first ever media line was dialing 16 or 160, and it was invented in 1966, and it was dial-a-disc. And this went on for over 20 years. You dialed the number, you could listen to the latest pop chart songs at the time. It wasn't very good quality at all. I mean, it certainly wasn't stereophonic and surround sound. It was a compressed sound, coupled up with crackles and whistles that came through those old copper wires. But we used it, and if we could, we'd go down to the telephone box and listen to those latest tunes by putting our 2 pences, one in after another. And we thought it was absolutely fabulous. Now, in the 1960s, we rented our telephones. Nobody bought one, and you could just change your telephone or your colour, let's say you've decorated, if you liked, completely free of charge. You paid a rental on top of your standard charge for these telephones. Probably the most robust telephones I've ever come across. I've still got a few today, and they work absolutely fine. We can never forget those old bell ringtones that we used to get from those old telephones. We could remember the dial tone, can't we, with that low sound that pulses through, that click, click, click down the phone as we dialed the numbers, for the exchange being a Strowger or a crossbar, which was basically a manual lot of clicks that pop you through to the number that you required. Sometimes these clicks would go wrong because it was mechanical, and you used to get what we call a cross line, or you pick up the phone and you'd get the wrong number. or you'd hear other people having a conversation. There were lots of wrong numbers in them days. But it was all part and parcel of using the telephone. Calls were either trunk or national or local calls. Now, local calls would be within 60 miles and they would charge at a cheaper rate. A trunk call over 60 miles, they would call that long distance and that would be charged at a much higher rate. And international calls, wow, they were very expensive. It was a point in time where you could not ring an international number, you had to go through the operator. International direct dialing didn't start until 1963, but then you could only ring France. And it wasn't until 1979 when you could fully ring any country you wanted without having to go through the operator. Now, the wonderful things about telephone calls back in the 60s and 70s is you didn't have to speak to a machine or press 1 for this or 2 for that, or your call is important to us, please hold the line, and all sorry to keep you waiting, you've heard it all before. It rang, and you knew when that phone was answered, you were going to speak to a person, and that person was more or less going to sort out your problem, or at least communicate with you on a one-to-one. How many people miss those days? Now, when you were expecting an important call, you had to be home. There was no way that anyone could communicate with you over the phone if you weren't there. The answering machine was introduced in the late 1960s, but they were on rental and very expensive. Plus, there was no way you knew who called if they didn't leave a message. There was no caller display or 1471. Caller display didn't come into operation until the early 1990s. It's the most frustrating thing that was when you were coming in, got your key in your door, the telephone was ringing, you fumbled your way through that door just to get by the telephone and the damn thing stopped ringing. You had to wonder who rang, because there was no way you would find out unless, of course, they rang again.
No idea.
But I can also remember, particularly in the 1970s, there was an etiquette to telephoning. My mother always used to say, if you call anybody after 9 o'clock at night, it's considered rude. And older people would answer the phone with their number being said. And let's not forget the telephone voice. You see, because very few people had telephones, they had no experience. So they put on the poshest voice they could when they answered the telephone. Telephone was very much part of the household if you could afford one. Telephone tables, telephone directories, a perfect place in the hallway, and if you were really posh, you got a kitchen phone that was placed on your wall, a GPO 741. There were no cold calls in those days. If your telephone was ringing, unless it was the wrong number, you knew that call was for you. There was nobody on the phone telling you what sort of wonderful things I've got to sell you, or that Amazon account had been manipulated, that you owe a lot of money and all that rubbish. Fraud on the phones was not there at the time. You knew your home phone was a safe place. In the very late 1970s, things began to change with your home telephone. First of all, we had a digital exchange. We could communicate a lot faster because System X and System Y, the digital exchange, had begun. The GPO was moving over to British Telecom. Now could divert calls, you could have call waiting, you could bar calls, you could speak to two people by switching from one call to another. It was absolutely fantastic. With these star services, it was almost like the telephone call was now going into the future. Then suddenly we got the privatisation, with all communication companies wanting to do their bits for the big takeover. Mercury Communications, if you remember those. They all tried to jump on the bandwagon to give you cheaper calls and the best possible service. But that was when things started to disappear. We lost our 100, we lost our 192 directory inquiries, and now it became chargeable at a premium rate. Telephone boxes started to disappear, our yellow pages started to get smaller, and then we started to get the first ones were the people ringing us up just at tea time or when Coronation Street was on to try and sell us double glazing. We needed an operator no longer because we could dial 0800 for a free phone and we could dial internationally from our own phones. The personal service that we got from our telephones had completely changed. disappeared. No longer were we ringing people to get hold of a person. We were ringing people and getting recorded messages. We were ringing people and getting automated artificial intelligence. The standard that you got from your home telephone had gone down the pan. And it was such a shame, because those warm nostalgic memories still remain in my head, and all those numbers. And then there was the beginning of 0898. In the late 1980s, we could call a premium rate number and chat all night. You could ring a line and you're going to get somebody that told you your future. And there was even those naughty chat lines that were always advertised late at night. For the ones that were drunk enough that got back from the pub and picked up the phone and spent an exorbitant amount of money speaking to somebody that you don't even know. Dating lines, they called them. Find love at £150 a telephone bill.
Operator, are you there? Are you there? Are you there? Why do people do that? It never worked in the old movies, it doesn't work now.